Well, good morning, everybody. It's Father John Wilson here on Monday, May 25th. It's Memorial Day. So we honor today those who have given their lives in the service of our country, and please do make a point today to pray for them. So we've reached the Sixth Commandment. You shall not commit adultery, which means that it's time to have the talk. Catholic sexual morality. We got to talk about it. This is probably the episode most likely to get me banned from Facebook, so please don't report me. But, because this is controversial stuff, but it's beautiful and it's important. So I think a lot of people, when they see church teaching on sexuality as just like a list of don'ts. And, there's a big, long list of them. You can read them in the catechism. And, they might get the impression or ask the question, well, why is the church so obsessed with sex? And we're not. What the Church of Jesus Christ is serious about love. Human sexuality is one of God's greatest gifts. And we honor that gift by treating it like a gift. We use it in a way that honors the giver, that's in accord with the wisdom of the giver. And we know it's such a great gift because when it goes wrong in the worst ways. I mean, how much suffering in our world, how much suffering in the lives of people we know, our own lives perhaps, is caused by the dishonoring of this gift, using human sexuality in a way that's outside of God's plan, in a way that's selfish. So the law of God, expressed in the teaching of the Catholic Church, isn't about suppressing that gift. It's about harnessing and directing and empowering it through a virtue called chastity. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church, describes chastity in a really beautiful way. And it talks about how there are actually two aspects to it. Chastity is about the integrity of the person, and it's also about the integrity of the gift of self that a person is able to make. So what do we mean by the integrity of the person? Well, when we talked a few episodes ago, when we talked about why keeping the commandments are so hard, is that one of the consequences of sin is that the powers of the soul all of a sudden become divided against each other. In God's plan and God's wisdom, we were given our passions to be, subordinated and under the direction of reason, which is under the direction of wisdom of God. But, so often, right, the passions are in the driver's seat and they're pulling us in all kinds of different directions, and we don't feel like we're even one integral person sometimes, and we're not happy. No passion oftentimes is stronger than sex. And so when it's brought under the wisdom of God, it's actually a great force for good and beauty and truth and love in our world. So we got to talk about the wisdom of God. What is sex for? Well, it's not just a pleasure factory. In fact, if that's your answer, like you can almost notice in the way you say it, that it's kind of a cheap answer. There's got to be something more. And I think if we're looking for that something more, we shouldn't be ignoring the obvious, right? This power of the human body is the thing that, when linked up with the other half of humanity, causes kids, right? And this is a huge deal. This is a huge deal. A soul that is bound for eternal life, and God uses you to make that happen. You're his instrument in creating someone who's meant to know him and love him and serve him forever. So the power of reproduction is really one of our most godlike powers. And we read in the book of Genesis, it talks about God making man in his image and likeness. And then right there it says, male and female he created them. So there's something about us being male and female and complementary that fulfills the image of God. And that's precisely in our power to generate new life. It's like, wow, like that is a big deal. That is a huge part of our dignity. But there's something more, actually, that the sexual power brings about, and it's linked to the power to generate new life, because it brings about a very intimate union between two persons. Like there's a powerful kind of friendship that's made possible by our sexual power. And that sexual union is so powerful because it's formed by the thing that has those life-lasting consequences, right? You're embarking on a project of life together that requires sacrificing for each other and for your children. Like you see how these two purposes, these beautiful purposes, are meant to go together. And then, of course, there's also the delight that comes in that union. And this, I think, it's kind of like the crowning glory of that act of friendship. And, the drive for that, the passion of it, right? It's also what is supposed to impel you towards those higher goods. That's what the passions are for, to help us to do the good, more easily and readily and with joy. So that's what chastity is. It's the integration of human sexuality within the soul, according to the wisdom with which God created us. And that's what makes it truly powerful. And you might be saying, hey, that sounds great. I wish I had that integrity of soul. Well, the question is, okay, are you willing to work for it? Like all virtue, we got to train our passions and keep our mind focused on the goal, and to confess our sins and pick ourselves back up when we fall. It takes work, but we should at least start by seeing how it's worth it. Okay, so that integrity of the soul is that first part of chastity, and the second part of chastity we've kind of already talked about a little bit, but it's it enables you to make a full integral gift of yourself. It enables the good of marriage. And marriage in the gospel is talked about in terms of the union with Christ and his church. Husband and wives are supposed to lay down their lives for each other. It is a means of sanctifying each other, getting each other to heaven. So we're meant to make that gift of self, and it's a beautiful thing. I forget who said this, but I think it's a beautiful expression of the Catholic teaching on this stuff, that sexual union is in fact it's marriage vows made flesh, which means that when you're giving yourself, you've got to be given your whole self. And if you're using your sexual power and you don't mean by it everything that marriage means, that's a lie. You're actually lying in the language of your body. And you see this kind of across the board with different kinds of sexual sin. What does it mean when you have sex before you're married? Well, your body is saying in that moment, well, look, I am giving you my motherhood, my fatherhood. I'm doing the thing with you that leads to this lifelong project. That's what your body's saying. But if you haven't actually made those promises, then you're lying with your body, and that's why it's and we can kind of feel the lie if we're paying attention. The way that those unions kind of can play with the heart, and even within marriage, like you can't be trying to pull apart the different ends of that union. The friendship versus the generation of new life. That's why every single instance of sexual union is supposed to be at least open to new life. Otherwise, it's a lie. And you should read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's got a full list of the different kinds of sins against chastity, against the sanctity of marriage, and why they're sins. And it's a bracing read, but it's good. And we need to know the full truth if we're going to start really living authentically. Now, the Catechism also makes another really, really important point. And that's that chastity and the Christ-like gift of self that it makes possible is in fact for everyone. It's for everyone. And this is even though, and this is something Jesus himself acknowledges explicitly, that there are plenty of people for whom sexual union, the kind of friendship that's found in marriage, the typical expression of the friendship of marriage, plenty of people for whom that is not in the cards. Maybe you're married and your spouse gets sick, like a long-term illness, and you can't come together in the same way. Maybe your passions are such that, for whatever reason, you've never been all that attracted to the opposite sex. Maybe you've made a decision to forego marriage for some higher good, right? Whether it be religious life or the priesthood or some other important lifelong work of charity. There can be all kinds of circumstances, right? Sexual union is a powerful thing, but it is also not. It's not the sum total of human happiness. It's a means by which God draws us to himself, and he's got other means. And a powerful example of this is actually the most powerful example of this, I think, is Saint Joseph, the human father of Jesus Christ, the spouse of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Because interesting thing about Saint Joseph is that he and Mary never actually shared a bed. That's because her motherhood was already consecrated to God, right? She's the mother of the incarnate God. Even though Saint Joseph was her protector, her guardian, and her true husband, they never shared a bed. So Saint Joseph had to practice chastity in some pretty unusual circumstances. And yet he still practiced chastity, and he had the fullness of that virtue, and God channeled everything about his manhood into that full gift of self, raising a family, and in fact raising the Holy Family. And for all of us, right, our lives are in God's hands. And, he wants to give us the great gifts and the fruits of chastity. He wants to bring all of the powers of the soul, all of our power to love, under his wisdom. And when he does that, he will make it fruitful. Maybe not naturally, maybe not in having, lots of human kids, but supernaturally. God does not waste his gifts. And that's our great hope as we embark on this path of building the virtue of chastity. God bless you guys. Happy Memorial Day. I'll see you tomorrow.